information, and I want to make sure that we have plenty of time to get through everything. All right, let's see. Bear with me. Let's see. Make sure. Are you able to see my screen? It says lessons on money management and budgeting. Okay, great. All right, then I will go ahead. Let me just slide this over just a little bit and I will get started. So just to give you a little bit more information, so I am basically here because I am the sum of being a financial education specialist, but more importantly, I was a caregiver for my dad for the last 4 years. And so that's why this is extremely important to me. I'm definitely very passionate about financial education, but to be able to collaborate that with my experiences as a caregiver and hopefully provide some good, useful insight to you today is just, like I said, extremely empowering to me. So some of this information Christy just shared, but yes, I've been with the credit union or in the financial world for the last 25 years. I've been in my current capacity as the financial literacy coordinator for the last 6. I was a caregiver, as I mentioned, for my dad for 4 years, and of course, his sweet daughter, the baby girl, for the last 52 years. He recently passed in March of last year. So our agenda today, what I hope we can go ahead and discuss will be defining the caregiver role and responsibilities. We're going to do a caregiver financial assessment. We will do an assessment for your loved one. And then, of course, I will try and provide some tips on managing and budgeting for your loved ones. And then, of course, some of the lessons that I've learned along the way. So let's go ahead and get started. There's so much to talk about. When Christy asked me to talk about finances and budgeting for a caregiver, there were just so many things that just kind of popped in my head. Yeah, every conversation we had, I think we took a new turn. It's like, oh, I wanted to include that. I wanted to include this. I actually had a list, but I want to just kind of look at what we're going to focus on in terms of expenses, what impacts you as a caregiver. At the heart of it, it can be food, it could be medical necessities, it could be housing, transportation, it could be just simple everyday grooming or entertainment. And so one of the things that I would suggest, and I just want to start off with this, is having a journal. I think I thought about this late in my journey, but journals can be so impactful for what you're doing as a caregiver, whether it's to have a to-do list for what your tasks are for the day, maybe keeping up with your loved one's prescription schedule. You know, who's responsible for what, having that list. When we're going to talk about a budget, you may see that you have a journal, or you want to get a journal just to keep your budget, to track when your expenses start to increase, change in health, information for healthcare professionals. I always had to stop and write questions and put them in my phone, because I'd get in front of the doctor and I'd be like, what was I supposed to tell him? What happened? What changed? What do I need to say? So, or just questions that you have in general, whether it's for a medical profession, whether it's maybe for Christy or some other support help that you may have, and a place to keep those important numbers and addresses and phone numbers. So a journal is something I definitely recommend. And as you'll see, as we go throughout the presentation, you'll see that, there's going to be a lot of things that you're going to want to write and track and keep in order to be able to really be successful at managing the money and budgeting. When I thought about this particular presentation, I thought about maybe the journey that you're on, where you may be. And so for some of you, it may be that you have a recent diagnosis for yourself or a loved one. And so you're just kind of looking ahead and you're planning. You don't know what to expect. And so that's one of the reasons that you're here. For others, it could be that you were blinded by the forest. And what I mean by that, I was kind of in that scenario. When you're close to a person, sometimes it's hard to see those simple changes. Just think about if you see somebody every day and they're gaining weight, you don't see it. Or by the same token, if they're losing weight. But if you haven't seen them for weeks or months at a time, you're like, oh, she's a little thick amount around the midsection, or honey, are you eating? You're getting thin. It's so much easier to see it. But when it's that person that you're involved with and you see every day, sometimes you can't see their health declining. And then all of a sudden you found yourself in this particular circumstance as a caregiver. or it could be a combination of them, because that was the scenario for my dad. His health was declining slowly, but he was my Superman, so I couldn't see it. That's who I saw, Superman, even though the legs were a little bit skinnier and the walk was a little bit slower. And boom, we were faced with having to make some decisions. And he had an acute illness, or a circumstance where he fell, and literally overnight my life changed, just completely. I can remember basically the day, the hour, and time of when my life changed. And one of the things that I think I wish somebody had told me then, that when we were facing this, is what I have in the quote in the little box. It says, "Stop looking at your life in the rearview mirror. You're not going that way." Because I was so stuck. And I tell you, this one, I have to get myself together. I've done presentations for forever and a day, but nothing is dear to my heart as this one. But there was a time when, just looking back, it's like before May 31st, 2016, he was perfect. He was able to do everything. He was independent. And so it can be challenging to face forward and look at dealing with finances and the other issues or responsibilities as a caregiver. So I say to you, stop looking at your life in the rearview mirror. You're not going that way. But hopefully today's tips will help you feel positive about what direction you're going to, and the tools and resources that are available to help you along this journey. So I want you to think about your characteristics of a relationship. This seminar will focus a lot on finances, but you really want to look at, what is your relationship with the one that you're caring for? We love people, but do we like them? And so you want to be able to look at your relationship with that individual, because that has a lot of impact on how helpful they may be in terms of you getting information about their finances. Um, are they introverts or extroverts? Are they to themselves, or you to yourself? Are you an introvert? Because you're going to have to be able to get out and ask questions and really be able to speak to people and get information. It's almost like a network, just like you're here today to learn this information. It's going to require a lot more of that for you to be able to take control and do the best that you can do with finances. Is that individual public or private? I can tell you from my experience, my dad was a very private person. Couldn't tell you what his income was, where he stood with his bills, until the day it became necessary for me to take over as his child, or as his guardian, if you will. And so that made it very challenging, because I didn't know a lot of what his private finances were. And so knowing what that relationship is there trust, right? He trusted me, but he was just a very private person. And so again, if you have that trusted relationship with that individual, it can make the transition for you being able to help them with their finances a lot easy. Are they independent or dependent? When I think of my parents, I had one of each. My mom, she was somewhat dependent. So she welcomed us as her children, being able to help her and do things for her. My dad, on the other hand, was extremely independent. And so it was a little bit harder for him to let go of the reins and let somebody else take over. But again, these are just a list of things that you want to think about that relationship, and maybe how you want to approach it. Because sure, as a concerned person, their loved one, we know for ourselves that we have their best interests at heart, but we also want to be able to look at, what is their personality type. If they're private, what does it mean to them to have to divulge all of their personal information to you? If they're independent and they've been used to managing their own money, what does it mean that now somebody else has control of their bank book, their debit card? They can't just go and spend money as they want. So you want to be able to look at those characteristics and what the relationship you have with them specifically, because different individuals have different relationships with different family members and different friends. So take a closer look at yours and keep that in mind as we move forward and talk about the different things that you need to discuss or look for when we're talking about finances. All right, I'm sorry, I didn't realize all of those little things didn't even pop up on my screen. So the first thing I want to really dive into is defining your roles, understanding your responsibility. Caregiver is such a broad term, and it encompasses a lot of different things. You may have one role, or you may have several of these. You could be a companion, just someone that spends time with your loved one, making sure that they're not alone, just there in the event that they have a need, if they have a question, if they want you to do something, but just more or less support for that person. Maybe you're providing some medical assistance, making sure they take their medication, helping them walk. Um, it could be grooming. Maybe they need help getting in and out of, the restroom, the bed, going places. And you may just be that person that just kind of goes with them and provides that helping hand. And then, of course, there's the financial affairs, which we'll dive into, needing help with their money. And we'll talk about the different stages they may be at in terms of finances. And then, of course, there's legal affairs. So the first thing is really just to kind of take a look at, what am I responsible for? Is it just one or two of these things, or is it a combination of these things? Because if we think back to, the first chart I showed you when we talked about the different expenses, food, if you're a companion, it may be that, you bring over dinner for them every once and again. Or it could be more specific in that that person is now living with you, and that's the extra mouth that you have to feed. And so depending on what your responsibility is, that will really dictate what your financial expenses may be and what you can expect. You also want to define the roles of others. Once you know what your role is, are you the companion? Are you all of those things? Or are you the everything to that particular person? What other individuals are in that person's life? What role do they play? Can you expect support from them? Or are they just on the sideline watching? Do you have a support system that's local? In many cases, you may have a loved one that has children, they have siblings, but they may be in New York, they may be in Tennessee, they may be 2 or 3 hours away. And while they may want to provide some support, you have to look at, where are they? How feasible is it that they can do support? And so understanding their roles will help you understand where you are financially too. Have they offered support? Are they able to provide it in terms of their time? Not everything focuses around the actual dollar, but time, as they say, is money. So if they can help with time in terms of you not having to pay somebody else to sit with them, are they able to actually contribute to your finances, or even just emotional support? So you want to be able to define those roles. It could be a significant other, it can be children, it could be the parents, it could be extended family member, or friends, but you want to be able to define those relationships that are close to this loved one, that may have an impact on the decisions that you have to make in terms of the finances. Don't be afraid to ask for help. And that's again, whether it's time, money, or emotional support. If there is a support system and you know what your role is, don't be afraid to ask for assistance. That's a lesson that many of us may have to learn the hard way, because I was very independent like my dad. And so it was just not in me to ask for help. I thought I had to do it all alone. And now I want to talk a little bit about understanding your authority, because these are things that are really, really important for you to define before we even get into talking about the finances. And so there are three positions of authority that I want to talk about. One is a sole proprietor. If you're an only child and this is your parent, this may be you, in that you don't have to answer to anybody else. You don't have to discuss how things are going to be impacted. You don't have to look at who else is going to help me with the expenses. It's you. You are solely running the ship. You are solely responsible as a caregiver for that particular loved one. It could be a partnership. It could be a spouse, siblings that may, two people that may be working together, right? And so that it's 50-50. Or it could be where you have a strong support system. It could be a larger family and you have a group of individuals. And so then, there's a discussion in terms of who does what. But you want to be really, really clear about that, and maybe even write it down. I'm not advocating that you have any type of contract, but just be clear. Sister's going to do this on Tuesdays. My brother's going to do this on Wednesdays. This person's responsible for medication. This person's responsible for grooming, or whatever those needs are. You really want to be clear about what your role is, what your resources are, and who else is going to impact them. What you definitely want to do is avoid making assumptions. In my particular scenario, my dad became ill literally overnight, and there are three of us, and my sister is the one that does not work. And so she made that assumption, and she was like, oh, they're going to expect me to, be able to take care of our parents since I don't work and they do. And that was not the case. But I could tell early on that she was in her feelings, or she felt some kind of way because there were assumptions. She made an assumption that because, she had more time available than the other siblings, that was the position that she was going to be in. And that was something that we had to talk about and we had to work through. Okay. So now getting into actual finances, the first thing that you want to do as a caregiver is have a self checkup. Okay. Before you can really approach caregiving from a financial aspect for somebody else, you've got to look in the mirror and say, do I have it together? Do I have my finances together? Where do I stand? What am I capable of doing? How much financial help can I be to that loved one? And so in there are going to be three parts. There's going to be a budget analysis, a credit analysis, and even a banking analysis. And even though my focus right now is on you as a caregiver, these principles apply when you're going to be looking at your loved one's finances. You want to do the same type of analysis. So let's look at that budget analysis. For starters, what is a budget? A budget is just a plan for your money. Okay. I've been in the financial world for 25 years, and I think it's probably one of the greatest tools you could ever use. If you have never used a budget, I definitely recommend it, especially now that you may not only be in charge of your finances, you may be in charge of the finances for your loved one. So a budget is a plan for your money. It is an account for your income less your expenses. Again, just planning your money, understanding where you are. Do you have enough income to take care of your expenses? Will you have enough income if you need to have take care of the expenses of the loved one? And probably almost just as important as the first two, it helps reduce stress. No matter what type of financial circumstance you're in, money can be stressful. Taking care of bills can be stressful. But as a caregiver, you know, I, when you say the word caregiver, it's almost like it's encompassed in the word stress, because it is really a stressful role. It really, really can be. But having a budget can definitely help lighten the load when it comes to the finances. There are a lot of things that you will not have control over as a caregiver, but taking control of your finances doesn't have to be on that list. That can be one of the carefree things if you use a budget. So let's look at what a budget is. This is a formal one. This is one I use for my clients. And I'm showing you this because I just want to give you an idea that if you've never used a budget, what should it look like? What kind of information do I need? As you see on this one, it breaks down and you're looking at housing expenses, everything from whether there's rent or mortgage, what the utilities are, cell phone, cable. And of course, there could be some others. This is just a real generic general one. So you may have some other housing expenses like dry cleaners that maybe you don't see in there, your car expenses. And this is a tool because, especially if you are kind of stressed and hectic, maybe you've got so many other things to worry about. This just kind of gives you prompts of what things you should include. How much do you spend on gas, your car insurance, maintenance? What kind of debts do you have? Do you have credit card bills? Do you have a mortgage? Do you have loans, student loans? What kind of debts do you have? And this is a two-pager. And of course, then it goes on to the miscellaneous. And I'll back up for a second because this page is what we refer to as fixed expenses, the ones that basically you're going to face every month. If you're renting or have a mortgage, you're going to see that every 30 days, right? Utilities come every 30 days. You really don't have a lot of say so in terms of these particular debts. Whereas when we get to the next page, the miscellaneous page, this is what we call our flexible expenses. You do have a lot of say so. Your groceries. Do you buy a generic? Do you buy a brand? Do you cook at home mostly, or do you eat out a lot, right? How often does grooming take place? Do we go to a salon and take care of our grooming needs and haircuts and things, or do we sit at home and polish our own nails or get the clippers out and figure out how to take care of our own grooming needs? So on the miscellaneous page, there are a lot of things that are optional. and in terms of how much you spend on these particular things. And of course, if you look here at the bottom, you want to total all of those things up. And I'll back up again because, of course, at the very top, which I skipped completely over, my apologies, you want to look at what your income is, and that is going to be your net income. And again, we're talking about you as the caregiver. We'll get to the loved one in just a moment. What are you bringing home after taxes? What goes into your bank account? How much is your actual paycheck? So that's at the start of it. And you also want to analyze what deductions you have coming out. And that's the reason this form is strategically structured the way that it is. It asks you for your gross amount. So maybe your gross amount is 2,000. Then you're going to list those deductions. What's coming out of my check? Social Security, health insurance, 401k. Okay. And then you're going to get your net number. It's important to understand what's coming out as deductions, because if we get to a point to where we need more income, that may be a place that we have to look at. Are we overinsured? Sometimes we have too much insurance. If we get a tax refund, that's basically another term for an overpayment to the government. So, you're overpaying them $200-300 every month, and you get one check a year for $3,600. You may be better suited to have that $200 or $300 go in your paycheck and help you be able to make ends meet from month to month. So you want to look at your net income, look at all of your expenses, and then when we get to the very, very bottom, you're going to do a total. You're going to take your income, your bring home pay, less the total of all of your expenses. You should have a positive number, right? If you have a positive number, you're going in the right direction. But let's take a look in a second if you have a deficit. This can be as simple as using pen and paper. You don't have to use a real formal plan. If you do want to use the real formal plan, I can send you a copy of mine. You can go on the website and just Google a budget worksheet. They're all pretty close to being the same, but pen and paper will do. If you're old school and you just want to be able to write it down on your tablet, this is what I make this month. Here are my expenses. It works the same way. There's no magic in having a pretty little form. But what I do want to caution you about is when you're doing a budget, be thorough. Don't overlook the small expenses. If you go to Smoothie King every Friday and, $5 Fridays, that's $20 a month. That's an expense, especially if you religiously do it. If you're going to the car wash every week, that needs to be considered an expense. The cleaners, if you are constantly, handing out $5 when you get off the interstate and they have the homeless people sitting there, even though these are not bills that you get in the mail, you can't be putting a credit bureau form. Bill collectors won't call your name. But if you're consistently putting money toward this particular category, it needs to be on your budget. The worst thing you could do is overlook those. And then what happens is it looks like, oh, I got $2,000 in income. I only have $1,000 in expenses, so I should have $1,000 less left. And yet you think, I know I don't have $1,000 left, right? So if that's the case, that means you're not being thorough. And one tool that can help you be thorough when you're completing a budget is grab your bank statements. Get at least 2 months worth of bank statements where you do most of your checking from. And then take a look there and make sure that if you see repeat items on those statements, that they are listed on that budget. It can be Netflix. We forget about those little bit of charges. You want to make sure you have as comprehensive a budget as you can. And so that's how you understand where you are as a caregiver. If there is a deficit, if you come up and you're short, then you got to look at how can I reduce my expenses? Probably the first thing you want to do is identify things that are needs and wants. And again, this is going to apply to your loved one's budget too. Sometimes we have to look at, this is where my money is going. I don't have quite enough, or maybe I need to make some adjustments because now I'm going to have some new expenses as a caregiver. So you want to be able to reduce your expenses. There are a number of different ways that this can be done. For starters, paying bills on time, because late fees just add up and eat away at our income. Reviewing your statements to make sure that there are no mistakes or overpayments. These kind of things happen quite often. Shopping with a list is one of my favorites. We go to the store, and if I could have you all on camera and ask how many of you live in Walmart or at least lived in Walmart before COVID, I'm sure I'd see lots of hands go up, right? I was one of those people. I'd go into Walmart and say, okay, I'm gonna get about 25. Then I thought I was smart and said, okay, well, I'm gonna adjust it to 50. And then I started spending 75. And it wasn't controlled until I started getting a list and saying, I'm getting milk, bread, this and that's all. And that should add up to $25. That's what helped me get my spending under control. So these are just a number of things that can help you unplug um, items, electrical items that are not being used. And then count the gym and we don't go. We get 10 magazines in the mail and we no longer have time to read them. So take a look at those things that may be able to add or reduce your expenses. The other thing could be to increase your income. As a caregiver, and I'm not an expert in this particular area, but I know that there have been circumstances where I know that I was the daughter and I was the caregiver, but because of maybe my parents' insurance or Medicare or benefits, I was able to be paid as a caregiver the same way they would pay a hired person from a business. So you could always look and see if there's an option for you. If there's an option to do part-time work, selling things. We all have a house full of stuff, and I'd be the first to say probably things that we don't need. And that seems to be a modern way to supplement the income. People are using places like Craigslist and Facebook to sell things to supplement their income. And then there's also turning a hobby into an income. Some of you are probably great cooks out there. Maybe, you make pecan candy. And if you do, you can send it to Christy and she'll get it to me, right? But those are just simple things, skills that somebody has that you may be able to turn into an income to supplement it to help get that budget intact. Now I want to talk about a credit analysis. And again, we're still focusing on caregiver because remember, we have to make sure we're straight before we can start helping somebody else. So what do you want to know, or what should you do with your credit? For starters, you want to know your status. Okay, know where you stand. If you have not looked at your credit report in the last 365 days, I'm talking to you. Okay, you should be looking at your credit report at least once a year, preferably more frequently, but at least once a year. I have on the screen where you can go to get your credit report. It's annualcreditreport.com. There are three different credit bureaus, and they will allow you to access a copy from all three. It's Experian, TransUnion, and Equifax. When you get your report, what are you going to do with it? One, check to make sure all the information is accurate. Make sure everything on there is yours. Make sure you're not a victim of identity theft. You want to look at it to understand your buying power, right? If I need to do a loan, if I need to use credit, am I able to do it? A circumstance I was in, my dad became ill, I'm sorry, Memorial Day 2016. And right after that, for those of you in the Baton Rouge area, the Great Flood happened. His house was totally destroyed. He had 5 feet of water. Um, Immediately after that, he moved with me in my home. He didn't have flood insurance. So, of course, FEMA gave out a little bit of money, but it was nowhere near the amount of money he needed to be able to restore his house. So the next option was an SBA loan. And so because of the debt and income he had, he didn't qualify by himself, right? But the house needed to be repaired. Not repairing it just didn't seem to be an option. And so it was important that I understood where my credit was, or if there was somebody else in the family, you know, somebody needed, in our case, to be able to step up and say, hey, I'm going to be able to go ahead and co-sign, because he was not in a position to where he could get this loan on his own. So it was good that I understood what my buying power was, what my credit score was like, and was confident that if he needed a co-sign, or if I needed to be able to put myself out there, and we'll talk about what that means, but that I understood that I could, what my limitations were, and if you identify that you're not, then maybe having a backup plan. Hopefully we'll never see a flood again, but emergencies happen. There are all types of emergencies that happen where you may find yourself in a situation where on behalf of your loved one, you may need to utilize credit. Understand your debt. Do you have an effective plan to reduce or eliminate your debt? Um, and then when we're talking about co-signing, and this is not something I'm advocating for, but I'm just being real. If you had asked me 6, 7 years ago, would I be a co-signer on the SBA loan? I would say, what are you talking about? I just wouldn't even be able to comprehend the conversation that you would try and engage with me. A SBA loan, my dad being sick, not having the credit or the income to get it. It just would be so far over my head. But here it is 6 years later, and that's the circumstance that I'm in. And so when you co-sign a loan, that means that you're responsible for the loan, right? Dad is no longer here. This is Kim's loan. But I understood that when I signed the papers. Unfortunately, the debt did not die with dad. Okay. There could be some loans where that's the circumstance, but in this particular case, it wasn't. And so you need to understand what it means to co-sign on a loan if you're put in that particular situation, or if you just want to look to the future and not be caught by surprise. Because when the flood happened, I was caught by surprise, but I felt like, for me, what other option did I have? Not putting his house together again for me was just not a viable option. Understanding debt to income, and this is really important when you get a loan on behalf of somebody else, because guess what? Dad's not here. I have the loan. Now, what if I want to go make another purchase? They're still going to look at that loan as mine, even if he was here. And so I have to look at, will I still be able to buy my next car, my next house, furnish my next trip with this loan? So these are questions that you want to be able to ask yourself when you are faced with a situation where you may have to take out credit for on behalf of a loved one. Late or missed payments. If that person is still the loved one, you're relying on that person to actually pay the loan. Okay. Understanding that if the payments are not made on time, how does that impact your credit? So, again, do a good credit overhaul on yourself. Understand where you are. You may never need to do it, but it's one of those things that, at least if you know now where you stand, you will better be able to handle those unexpected circumstances that might need credit. Plan for the worst, hope for the best. Moving on to checking account management. Always easier said than done. Questions to ask yourself. Do you currently know how much money you have in the bank? I'd like to say to a penny, because I know how much mine is to a penny, but do you have a real good comprehensive idea of how much money is in your checking account or savings account on a day-to-day basis? What is your average daily balance as a caregiver? Are you living paycheck to paycheck? I mean, are you down to $4 before your next payroll or source of income? Or do you usually have a good cash flow? You can keep a couple of $100s in there, and you're not sitting by the phone or the looking at your app waiting for that next deposit. Because it's important to understand what your limits are in terms of your cash flow. Do you experience overdrafts? Because again, if you're not handling your finances well, are you going to be the right person to step up and help manage your loved ones? And maybe there's no other person. And so this could be that wake up call. How do I get myself together so that I can manage my money and the money of my loved ones? And then, of course, seeking financial assistance. I do financial counseling at the credit union. That's a free service. And I always stress that you do look for free service. Getting assistance, there's a plethora of free assistance when you need help with money. There are lots of places that charge you fees. I would say stay away from those, because you want somebody that doesn't have anything to gain from it. My only gain is to help somebody. That's what helps me sleep at night. You're not paying me at all to sit down and look at your finances, look at your checkbook, help you understand how to balance your checkbook. So I want to move on now to savings. Do you have emergency resources, regular savings, retirement savings? Again, analyzing those things before you move on to helping somebody else. And then using those time saving resources. If you've never used them before, now would be a great time to get familiar and get comfortable with those things that can really, really save time. Online banking, mobile banking, having things automatically drafted from the account. automatically deposited. Before, maybe you had all the time in the world, but as a caregiver, sometimes that time just evaporates, and that extra 10 minutes going to the credit union or to the bank and standing in line on the drive-through becomes valuable. And so setting up things using time-saving resources can go a long way. All right, so now let's talking about managing the loved ones. And you want to start at home. And so now that you're in this role, you want to be able to look at how does it impact my household specifically? Having those conversations with those individuals in your house so that they can understand, what does this mean for me? What does this mean for your kids, for your spouse, or other family members? Um, Changes in routine. Okay. There were a lot of changes in my routine. I had to leave earlier and do more things, which was, again, more time. And I always like to say, time is money. Will there be financial changes? So maybe you were giving the kids money every time they asked, or some other family member, whenever they asked, you were able to do for them. But now that maybe you're a caregiver and you're taking on another financial responsibility, that role may change. So again, talking about how it impacts your household first. Housing accommodations can change. I know when my dad had to come stay with us, as a matter of fact, I asked my daughter last night, I was like, when Papa came to live with us, where did you go and sleep? Because we had a 3-bedroom house. Her brother had a room, she had a room, my husband, I had a room. And she said, Mom, I brought my mattress in the room and that's where I slept, because it's been such a time that I couldn't even remember those little details. Your social life, your personal time, your family time, what kind of impact is it going to have? Now let's look at identifying financial status. So there are 3 statuses that I want to discuss. One is independent. That means your loved one is aware of their expenses, their debts, assets. They actively handle everything now, right? And if that is the case, that is great, because this is the time that you want to have the discussion with them. Find out who they owe, how much they owe, what they owe, the whole kit and caboodle, while they can actually have a discussion with you, discuss what their wants are, what their needs are, what assets they have, maybe some debts. And that's the best position to be in, especially again, maybe you're just getting a diagnosis. And so it's early in the game, and this is information that's going to be easy for you to get. Maybe they're mildly dependent. They clearly understand what their finances and debts are, but it may be a little taxing to figure out mobile banking or how things should get paid, especially with technology today. It can be frustrating and confusing. Christy and I had a conversation before the workshop started, how we have all these different Zooms and WebExes, and even at our age, it can be a headache, it can be a hassle. And so it's not that we can't do these things. I just prefer to be in person. And so that could be that individual. It's not that they can't, but it may be easier to go ahead and turn it over to that caregiver now. So they're mildly dependent. And then there's the severely dependent. That's the individual that basically cannot function well enough to take care of their own expenses. They may not be able to articulate how they take care of their light bill, or what credit cards they have, or what loan payments they have. It may be very confusing to them. And so that you as a caregiver, you now have to step in and take care of that role. And so then you also want to be able to assess, after you've looked at their level, their financial status, you want to look at what risks exist for your loved one. Okay. There's so many risks that our loved ones face when they're facing an illness and a challenge. Risk of incurring debt. Okay. Does that person have a rational understanding of their expenses, their income? And are they just maybe spending money? Do they need money? My dad would always ask for cash, right? But he didn't go anywhere that I didn't go. So why did he need cash? Because I was spending it, or if maybe they're not always in your care and they have cash, is there a risk that they could lose it, give it away? Okay. If they're at home a lot, online shopping, right? That has been something that has, become more popular than ever, especially with the pandemic, with us being isolated, and generally individuals that need caregivers are probably more isolated than the average person. And so it's very easy for them to get caught up in online shopping. And if they have access to their debit cards, their credit cards, would they be able to spend a reasonable amount of money, Or would you come home one day and see that their package is stacked to the roof because they got really, really excited? Or maybe they talked to the QVC lady for an hour and they said, well, I don't want to waste your time, honey. Let me at least place an order since you were being so kind. And these things happen. Are they at high risk for a scam artist? Oh my God, when I was living with him, I missed the calls because I was at work. But there were times I wish I were there because it was the IRS, it was the newspaper people, and these were scams. It was the cable people. There were scam calls every day. And if your loved one is at home and able to answer the phone, could they be scammed easily? Being in the banking industry, oh, I don't know if I had $1 for every time we got a call in the morning. I was on the phone last night and I was talking to a person and I gave them my information. And the minute they hung up, they realized that it was probably a scam. And then, of course, they had to go through the process of maybe closing their account and opening them. So maybe, you know, making sure that person is not in a position to where they can give out their card number, give out their social security number, or having somebody with them, or maybe using an app that may deter a lot of those calls from coming to their phone, whether it's a landline or whether it's a cell phone. But scam artists are there and they're very clever. They target every age. We like to think that it's the older generation that gets scammed the most, but they're just available, right? I'm not at home to receive those calls. I'm not answering calls while I'm doing my job. So I'm just not available for them to get to me. But if I were at home watching TV, retired, I'd have time to answer the phone. And so maybe I would be in a greater risk for being a scam artist. So that's definitely a risk. Then there's risk of theft. Is financial information easily accessible in the house? You could be a caregiver, but you may be one of many. How many people would be able to walk in the house? Or the credit card statements left out? Is the checkbook left out? Are those things where somebody that may have mischief tendencies, would it be easy for somebody to access your loved one's personal financial information? Maybe your loved one has a history of sharing that information. They want somebody else to be able to take care of their bills, and maybe the first person that walks through the door will do it. I've seen when I worked in the branch, somebody have their neighbor, they come and add them on their checking account, right? Because the neighbor's a good friend, they've been a neighbor for years, and they want them to help them out sometimes because they forget things, and then before you know it, money starts missing, and now they take the neighbor off, and then they want to use the third cousin. Okay, so making sure that they're just not in a position to where they are sharing information or being aware of that. They may want to delegate it. They may call it delegating. I want my grandchild to just go over to the pharmacy and pick up my medicine. And maybe they pick up the medicine and a couple of other things. In the financial world, we see some of everything. Or they could just be a straight out victim of theft, whether it's by a caregiver, a family member, or a friend. And this is very, very common when we're talking about individuals that may be suffering from dementia, because the person that's stealing feels like they can't tell. They're not going to be able to tell what happened, right? They may not know, they may not remember, right? They may have them sign a check and they may think they're signing a check to pay their light bill, and this individual may go pay their car note with it, right? Those things happen. And of course, in those instances, there are elder abuse, there are hotlines, there are places that you can report it. There are measures in place. For example, when I mentioned having somebody on the account and that person is not a trusted resource to have on that person's account, you'd have to check with the financial institution. But most of them have measures in place where it may be able to be rectified. Okay. And that's why I want to really get into the next section when we'll talk about becoming that authorized person. But keep receipts and keep a journal. Going back to that first page, keep a journal, because keeping track of what your loved one is doing, what they can and can't do, will go a long way. I like to call this the scavenger hunt because, again, my dad was fine one day and then all of a sudden he fell ill. And it was like, oh my God, who does he owe? How much money does he have? Does he have money in the bank? Like, he was in the hospital for 21 days. And we didn't know if the light bill was covered. We didn't know if the water bill was covered. And so it was a scavenger hunt, trying to put the pieces of the puzzle together. And because that was his first bout with dementia, he was not able to tell us, right? We didn't ask beforehand because we didn't see the forest for the trees. We knew he was getting older. We knew he was getting slower, right? But we didn't think to ask, well, Dad, let's talk about your finances in the event something happens. So, lessons to be learned. If you're in a position where you can have these conversations, do have them. What is their source of income? Are they still working? Do they have a paycheck? Do they get retirement income, pension income? I was clueless. And I considered my family close, but my dad was just private. I knew that when we came over on Sundays, he had food to eat and the air conditioner was on and he had a car. So it was all good as far as I was concerned, right? I did not know what went into his bank account, right? Did not know. He raised us to be independent. So we didn't borrow money. So it was just, we just didn't discuss it. If I could go back in time and change things, obviously those would be some conversations that I would have had years ago. What is their savings like? What resources do they have available to contribute to their own care? Do they have savings? Or they maybe you were already taking care of them even before they were diagnosed or started having symptoms or anything. Maybe you were already taking care of their rent or their mortgage, or maybe there's another family member that was. So understanding what their financial resources are, and then looking at it, how sustainable is this income? My dad had a part-time job because he didn't want to sit at the house and get old. But once he became ill, that part of his income went away. And so what he originally had before May 31st was now reduced because now it was just retirement and pension. The little part-time job income was gone, you know, or if they have that job again, how likely is it that they'll be able to keep it 6 months from now, a year from now? Can they continue to work if they're working? And again, if they stop working, what resources do they have? You want to be able to know as much as you can about their income. Now, the scavenger hunt continues. Now we're looking at their debts and financial obligations. Again, it was just like being blindfolded and trying to look for things that you don't even know what you're looking for. I knew about the regular debts. I knew that he had a light bill and a water bill. I guessed that the house was paid off. Who was his insurance with? He had multiple bank accounts. Which one does he use to pay for his expenses? What is this bank account for? And so now is the time, for you to ask these questions, or you may be put in a situation where you've had to just kind of feel your way and figure it out. But what are you asking? Who do they owe? Check bank statements, look at their mail, look at paperwork, that they may have, just if they have a file drawer, to kind of get an idea of where they stand financially, what type of debt, if any, that they have, or what type of assets do they have. What are their living expenses? Okay. Groceries. Basically, you want to know the dollar amount that they're spending on everything, the light bill, the cable bill, gas. If they're paying the little guy next door, the neighbor to cut the grass, what do they owe? What are those everyday living expenses? Then you want to explore the debt. Okay. Who do they owe? When is it due? How frequently do they pay it? Are they up to date? How much longer is this debt? Is it a 2-year loan or 3-year loan? How much longer do they have to pay it? Because again, once you figured out your finances, and let's say you're okay, and now you're looking at your loved one finances, is this a situation where your finances may have to compensate? Okay. If you've got to pay off dad's loan or mom's loan, or your loved one's loan, how much time is left? Is it a year left? Is it 12 months? Can you handle it? Okay. How are they paying it? And that was probably one of the most challenging things, because some of his debts came out automatically draft. Some of his things he paid by check or by mail. And then there were some that were automatically drafted that went to his debit, it came out of his debit account. And then he had some that were automatically debited to his credit card account. So it was this big puzzle, right? The pieces were big, but it still was confusing to put those things together, especially when you're caught in a circumstance where I need to know this now. I need to make sure his lights stay on. I need to make sure his water stays on if he had a mortgage payment. And so these are the things that you're going to have to find out or start digging and make sure you have this information. And again, back to that journal, write that information down as you begin to sort it all out. Becoming an authorized user. This is probably one of the biggest pieces of this particular presentation, because I couldn't just pick up the phone and say, "Hey, I'm Mr. So and so's daughter. I need to know how much he owes, when he got this money, what was it for, when's the next payment." Um, they didn't care, right? Even if you're a spouse, sometimes if you're not an authorized person on that bill, that debt, that expense, it may not be as easy as you think to get information. And so, I think if I could lead with something, it would almost be this slide after the journal, making sure that you can get access to your loved ones' financial information, because how can you take care of their finances if you don't have access to it, right? That is so key, so important. So for starters, contact the business to first learn about their guidelines and procedures. What happens if this person is unable to take care of their affairs? How can I get information? And it may be that now, while they're of sound mind and body, that they contact that place. If they only need a verbal agreement, a verbal authorization, that you have those kinds of things taken care of. Use caution and discretion when possible. And what I mean by that is, when you contact a business and you may say a person can no longer do something, maybe a person's in hospice, maybe a person, is no longer able to take care of their affairs. There are certain procedures that that institution has, and just by you calling, they're going to want to go ahead and enforce some rules and regulations, right? And you may not be ready to deal with that. And I'll give an example. My father had an account with a financial institution, and with most financial institutions, if a primary person passes, then they generally require that you close that account. If you're joint, they may require that you close it and then you reopen it in your name. Not all financial institutions. But if you start asking questions and they say, "Oh, I got Mr. Smith on the phone," because they're looking at the caller ID and I've seen this done, that person can't handle their affairs and nobody's joint. So we're just going to freeze the account. So I'm not advocating that you be mischief or hide anything, but sometimes asking questions prematurely can put you in a situation where, like you said, if you call for your loved one's account information and they understand that that person is incapacitated, that financial institution could take that information and freeze the account. Whereas you still need to pay bills. And now now you're forced to go through maybe legal measures to be able to get information or get access. So a lot of times when I've called, I will call from an undisclosed number. I may not necessarily get my name as I'm just getting information, because I've seen it time and time again where the financial institution or the business may feel they're acting on behalf of that person. In general, they have good intentions, but it can make your job and my job and the job of a caregiver a whole lot harder than it needs to be. Because again, just because you're the spouse, the child, the parent, that does not give you automatic access to their information. One thing that you can do, these are just common things that you can do to get authorization, is one, power of attorney. That's something that I'm sure will be covered when you have a legal person doing the presentation. They can explain to you what a power of attorney can cover. Understand that power of attorneys do need to be detailed, right? It just can't be general and say, "Okay, I want to be able to access their bank account." It needs to detail whether you can do deposits, withdrawals, open, close, do loans. It needs to be very specific. Understand that not all institutions are alike. Your loved one could have an account with Chase and with Neighbors. Chase will have one way of doing it. Neighbors will have a completely different way. So you can't assume that, "Oh, I went to Chase and all they needed was the POA." Neighbors may need a POA, a letter from this person, a letter from that person. And I'm just using this as an example, but don't expect that all institutions will have the same procedures, even if it's the same type of business. Turning in those documents may take time, because usually that institution's attorneys have to look over the documents. So you can't expect to walk in with a power of attorney and start to do business instantly. It could be days before they get an approval and say, "Okay, this has been approved. You now can proceed with doing XYZ." And POAs are not accepted everywhere. I was surprised to learn that just because you have a POA, not every business has to take it. Okay. It is not the all in all in terms of what you have to have in order to access information. So POA is a very common way to do it. There's becoming a joint owner, and this is specifically with banks, being joint on that person's account. But understand that if you're joint, that person is giving you full access, and that may be something that they're not comfortable with. Having a POA may seem the same as joint, but one clear difference is that generally with the POA, if the person passes, the POA is null and void. If you're joint, you still have access to the account beyond the person's passing. And then you may only want to have access as an authorized person to get information. Again, that could be something that maybe can be taken care of early on. I don't know how many times they just said, well, can you put your dad on the phone and just and have him verify that you can get information? There was a time when he could do it, but then there was a time when he really wasn't clear and he couldn't answer simple questions like, his address or his date of birth. And so generally those are a lot easier. You may just be able to be put on as an authorized user to at least know how much is owed, what the current balance is, what the payments are, but you can't make changes to the account. I'm going to go just a little bit faster because I see we're just up at an hour and I just have a few more slides I want to go through. When you've assessed your loved one's financial situation, there are going to be one or two circumstances where you have sufficient funds. If you have sufficient funds, you basically want to provide assistance as needed. Discuss what your loved one's wishes are. Understand what their assets are, how they want things handled, right? Be sure to anticipate future financial needs. Things may look really, really good today, but remember, you want to prepare for the worst, but hope for the best. So anticipate future needs, pay down debt, liquidate assets, understand what their insurance coverages are, both medical and life. Because while things are good today, what happens 6 months from now if their condition worsens? And so the expenses increase. But if you have insufficient funds, you want to review that budget for their needs versus their wants, right? Mom is living in this 4-bedroom house, right? But her finances are not going to cut it. Maybe mom needs to downsize or live with a family member. What type of benefits are available to them? SNAP benefits. There's so many nonprofit organizations like the Alzheimer's of Baton Rouge that provide so many benefits. Meals on Wheels, prescription assistance. And then there's 211 where you can call for additional resources. Don't be afraid to ask for help when you need it. You do not have to go through this process alone. Christy will attest, I called her many, many times, and I don't know where I would have been without her guidance and her being able to kind of calm me down and put me back into perspective. Anticipating expenses. You have established covered expenses and then those that are going to be out of pocket. As a person goes further into an illness, generally there's an increase in doctor visits. So understanding what's covered and what's not covered. Medical supplies, again, there are those that are going to be covered, right? Maybe a shower bar, a shower chair, but maybe things like incontinence diapers, things of those may not. So it's clear to understand even before you get to that point, if mom gets to this, if dad or my loved one or my child or whomever, if they get to that, what kind of financial resources will we be responsible for? Are prescriptions covered, or is it just Tylenol that's over the counter? Anticipating again, could they need a special diet? Maybe they're living with you, but they need to have specific food. They can't eat what you fix for everybody else. You have to get pureed food. Maybe you have to get Ensure. +1 expenses. Hey, you go to the ball game every Friday night. Now your loved one has to come. That's an extra $10 or $20 ticket. You want to be able to compensate for that. Respite care is ever so important. You want to make sure you're taking care of yourself. You want to make sure that if you have to take time off for work, travel, or vacation, right, that you've accounted for the expense, because it can be extremely expensive to have somebody else fill in for you if you have to pay that person. Time out for acute illness. That could be you not feeling well. Will it cost you money? Can you afford to be off if you have to take off for your loved one? Okay. And just in general, those expenses that increase if you're taking care of somebody else. Before it was 1 gallon of Tide at your house. Now you've got to take care of Tide at your house and Tide at their house, right? Or you were lugging 1 bag of laundry to the laundromat. Now it seems like you're tackling 5. So it's those little things that you've got to be able to look at and kind of forecast. Like I said, things could be good today, but they constantly change. My dad's needs constantly change. And it's one of those things. You can read books, you can participate in seminars like this, and they're very helpful because, again, if you're not experiencing it now, this is kind of at least a heads up to what you may encounter. All right, I'm sorry that I went over, but it was a lot of information. If there are questions, I will stop now, pause a moment for questions.
Oh, great. I enjoyed it, Kim. Thank you so much. I learned a lot myself and a lot to share with caregivers because we get a lot of questions about that too. So, I mean, you touched on a lot of great topics here. And you do have some comments and questions. And so I'll just read it to you.
Okay.
All right, let's start from the top. Okay. And I think you touched on this already. Can I present a POA to the bank if I'm trying to conduct business on behalf of my loved one?
You can present it, but again, be aware that it may not be instant when you walk in, because generally and I'll speak for neighbors, we have to send that document to an attorney. So it could be 2 or 3 business days before we get an answer. And it is at the attorney's discretion. They could say, for whatever reason, we're not gonna accept this POA. So just be aware that can happen. Go there with a bag of patience, because again, you're frustrated, you're trying to get something done, but they do have procedures and protocol that they have to go through, even if we don't understand the reason behind it. But yes, you can present it, but there is always the chance that they could refuse to accept it.
Thank you, Kim. Another question from Ann. Can a financial institution help me with any credit problems if I find problems? How can I get help with that?
Yes. Definitely, especially your credit unions. I'm very, very pro credit unions because we have a lot of financial education resources that we promote. I know at Neighbors, I do financial counseling. You can check definitely with your own personal financial institution that hopefully if they themselves cannot assist you, they can provide a resource where that organization can go through your credit report, help you understand what's on it. Like I say, what's the good, what's the bad, what's the ugly, and then provide action steps that you can take if there is improvement that's needed. And there's always room for improvement.
Thank you for that. Also, my loved one is mismanaging our bank accounts. What can I do to prevent this from continuing?
I guess, again, depending on that relationship, it's probably going to start with having that conversation at home and maybe seeing if you can come to an agreement that you take over the finances. And if it's something that can be handled that way, that's kind of like a best case scenario, that they agree to step back. Right. If that's not an easy solution, you may look at possibly opening a separate account and then moving the funds that need to take care of the household to that, and just leaving minimal access to that loved one.
Mm-hmm. Great. How would that work if the caregiver isn't on that account? Is the person's separate account? There was actually a situation I remember, or with a family, where that was, the challenge was that the person that was affected had their own account, and they were removing a lot of money from that account and couldn't remember where.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that may sound like a circumstance where that loved one, that caregiver, may have to seek maybe legal recourse to be able to take control of the finances, basically stating that this individual is not of sound mind to be able to handle it. Hopefully it does not get that drastic. Again, that's what I say, start at home having those conversations, especially if you can, before it gets to that point, and make that transition from that person handling it to them trusting you to be able to take care of it. And again, it goes back to those characteristics of the relationship. But I would think that would probably be hopefully a last resort, but that would be an option if that person is, has a true diagnosed medical condition that you may be able to petition a court. And again, that's probably something when you have the attorney on that can answer a little bit better, but that would say that, you're now what we call the representative payee. And so the check is for Jane Doe or on behalf of Jane Doe, but goes to your account. And now you're going to be able to take care of their finances.
Thank you. We have a question from Ms. Dorothy. What flags can be placed on the bank account if someone other than an authorized person takes loved one with dementia to bank?
You can specify that they definitely check identification. Depending on your relationship with the bank, you may be able to set up alerts that, depending on if you are an authorized person, alerts if certain withdrawals come out of the account for a certain dollar amount. I would like to think that in the perfect world, you could put a note that says, hey, call me if somebody other than, if somebody comes in with Miss Smith, but unfortunately, now that we're so big in every institution, generally we don't have the manpower for those things. I would say have a conversation with your financial institution specifically to see what they have. I know that we used to have notes, but they're just not 100% effective. It depends on somebody reading that note and understanding what it means. So I would just talk with the financial institution and ask them specifically, what can you put in place to prevent that type of circumstance? Because it's going to vary from place to place.
Great, great. And I have a comment. Kim, thank you for sharing these detailed information that some of us were not aware of. I actually did the hunt 2 times when Dad died, and again when Mom diagnosed with dementia 2 years ago. I thought about journaling, but now I really see the absolute necessity to do so. So thank you so much. Awesome. Any more comments or questions before we wrap up? If not, thank you so much, Ms. Kim Chapman. It was a great presentation. Lots of wonderful information. And I will tell you, on our side, the office side, we get a lot of questions regarding the banking and budgets and management. A lot of caregivers want to know about that. So thank you for sharing your personal and professional experience with us. Thank you again.
My pleasure, definitely. I hope that the information helps somebody.
Oh, yes, I believe so, definitely. And so to all of you, thank you all for coming and participating in today's workshop. I hope to see you next week when we'll have attorney Linda Malone, and she'll talk about long-term care and power of attorney in living wills and interdictions, and why some of those things are very important and or needed. And also, don't forget, we have our Lunch and Learn tomorrow at 12 o'clock on palliative care. There's still time to register for that workshop. As well as for those of you that register late, your workbook that's going to help you manage all of these important things is going to be in the mail. It's coming to you. And also, don't forget, for those that are interested in the free consultation with the elder law attorney, attend all 3 workshops and you qualify for that. Okay. So I hope to see you next week. You guys have a fabulous week. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedules to join us. Have a great day.
Bye-bye.
Bye.